In this video we're going to take a look at this, the DigitalFoto F20 Fresnel lens. Welcome to the channel, this is Mish. We've had this lens for about a month now, and during that time we've used it in a few real-world production scenarios, shooting a music video, working on a TV series, and also on a podcast shoot. DigitalFoto sent this to us, but they didn't ask to approve the video and all opinions are our own. Before going over the use cases, I want to quickly explain our logic for using Fresnel lenses instead of reflectors. About 10 years ago, when COB LEDs were just starting to appear in the film production world, Fresnel lenses were mainly used as a way to increase output. But today the situation has changed. Modern reflectors have become much more advanced than they used to be, and now most of them look something like this, with a faceted interior surface. This design boosts output a lot, so in many cases the included reflector gives you almost the same amount of brightness as a Fresnel. So for us, the main reason to use a Fresnel isn't output anymore. It's the quality of light, the quality of shadows, and the control. With a Fresnel, you can flood and spot the beam, and you usually get Barndoors as well. That makes it much easier to cut spill, create strips of light, or shape the beam quickly. One more thing that's worth mentioning is workflow. On paper, reflector versus Fresnel might look like a small difference, but on set it actually changes how fast you can work. With a reflector, you often end up fighting spill. You get light hitting the ceiling, the floor, the back wall, bouncing everywhere. And then you start adding flags, cutters, black wrap, maybe a floppy, maybe another stand, and suddenly your simple, hard light becomes a whole rig. With a Fresnel, especially with Barndoors, you can often shape the beam right at the source. Spot it, cut it, and you're done. So even if output is similar, Fresnel often save time because they give you control without needing extra grip. The only thing you usually need is a sturdier light stand, as the lens plus Barndoors adds some extra weight. Here's a quick demonstration we put together. I'm using a Panasonic Lumix camera with a luminance spot meter to measure exposure. In this setup, I've spotted the Fresnel all the way down to its tightest beam, about 10 degrees, and I exposed the camera so that the brightest spot reads 0 stops. Now let's see what happens when we flood the Fresnel. The illuminated area becomes larger. And right now, the meter reads about -1.8 to -1.7 stops. So that's almost a 2-stop difference between flood and spot. Now let's test the included reflector. And as you can see, this reads about -1.7 stops, basically identical to the Fresnel in flood mode. So overall, if you need a maximum output in a very narrow beam, a Fresnel fully spotted does make sense. And if you're blasting light into something like a reflector board or a mirror, a Fresnel can still be beneficial compared to the standard reflector. That said, some modern lights also come with multiple reflector options with different beam angles, so this advantage is becoming less important. Now here's the difference that really matters: shadow quality. Take a look at this image. The light is positioned about 2 meters from the subject, and the subject is about 1.5 meters from the wall. This is the shadow quality we get with the reflector. Look at it, it's mushy and undefined, and this is a huge giveaway of these faceted reflectors. The surface creates multiple overlapping shadows, ghosting, and other artifacts. Now compare that to the same setup with the Fresnel installed. Much cleaner shadows, much more natural looking. Here's a close-up. With the reflector, you can clearly see the extra edges, multiple shadow lines, and ghosting. It looks ugly, and it's definitely not something you'd want if you're trying to mimic direct sunlight or another natural hard source. And here's the Fresnel, much cleaner, better defined, and overall more believable. So for us, shadow quality and beam control are the main reasons to use a Fresnel instead of the included reflector. Quick note, the cleanest shadows usually come from using the bare COB with no modifiers at all. That gives you the smallest source, kind of like the sun and the sky, so the shadows are extremely crisp. The problem is, you lose about 1 or 2 stops of output and the light spills in almost every direction, so you need flags, cutters, and extra control, which takes time. A Fresnel is a good compromise, faster to work with, easy to shape, and the shadow quality is still very good. In real work, it's not about how bright it is, it's about whether the beam looks like a believable source. Now, this is a rather synthetic or artificial test. In real world, you probably wouldn't place a light source, subject, and a camera like this, and wouldn't get these kinds of shadows, so it's probably not as bad in real-world cases. But still, Fresnel gives much better result than a reflector in any case. Now let's move on to the F20 Fresnel itself. The outer diameter is about 20 centimeters, which I assume is where the name comes from. It's designed for fixtures up to 600 watts, more on that in a minute. It can spot from about 45 down to 10 degrees, and it comes with Barndoors. Here they are. They're a solid way to cut spill and shape the beam, especially if you need to keep the light off walls or backgrounds. Build quality is decent, it's mostly plastic except for the Fresnel lens itself, which is obviously glass, plus some metal rods, screws and bolts. On the back you can see air vents designed to prevent heat build-up inside the housing. Because it's mostly plastic, it's pretty lightweight. The barn doors have a plastic base, but the doors themselves are metal. And there's also a safety chain attached. And I can't stress enough how much I appreciate this. Barn doors falling off a light can cause real damage or hurt someone. And since the base is plastic, it probably wouldn't survive a fall anyway, so securing it is a very good idea. However, there's one downside. The safety chain is attached with a small bolt, and over time it can loosen and eventually get lost. So before using the barn doors, it's worth checking that the bolt is tight. Another downside is the latching system. It's extremely tight, so you'll probably need to practice mounting and removing the barn doors. It's a bit fiddly and usually takes a few tries. But the upside is once it's on, it's really secure, it's not going anywhere. One security thing I personally like doing is quick shake test. Once everything is set, I'd shake and bump the stand to make sure everything is stable. I'd rather things fall apart with me next to the stand than crash on an actor or some blameless PA. Here's a quick size comparison with Aputure 2X Fresnel. The F20 is larger, but it's designed for stronger lights. They're similar in height and weight is also fairly close. Even though the F20 is bigger, the Aputure 2X feels slightly heavier because it has more metal and also a secondary lens inside. When fully extended, the F20 becomes somewhat longer. Now here's the comparison with another Aputure product, the F10 Fresnel, originally designed for 600D, but also compatible with 1200D. This one is much bigger and much heavier. As you can see, it's larger in every dimension. And it's not really compatible with smaller lights, while the F20 can easily go on something like a 200X and still balance reasonably well. It's definitely front-heavy, but not dangerously so. I can easily see the F20 being used on smaller lights as well as something like a 600-watt fixture with no problems. But putting an F10 on something like a 200X is just not a good idea. I'd be genuinely worried about damaging the Bowens mount, and the whole setup becomes extremely front-heavy and uncomfortable to use, especially on a smaller yoke. So I'd say the F20 sits in a very comfortable middle spot between the Aputure 2X and the F10, covering lights from around 200 watts all the way up to 600 watts. One thing worth noting, the Aputure F10 is clearly designed for rental houses and heavy production use. It comes in a very strong case that can survive being thrown around in a production van by grips and electrics. The DigitalFoto case is much more basic. It's thin fabric with foam insert and it's more of a basic storage case, fine for personal use but not as rugged as you'd expect from rental-grade gear. Now let's go over a few setups where we actually used the lens. Amaran 300C podcast setup. We used the lens with Amaran 300C in a podcast production environment. It worked perfectly fine and I didn't notice any issues. Balance was acceptable considering the yoke on the 300C. Definitely front-heavy but not critical. Once you tighten the knob, it stays securely in place. That said, I wasn't using barn doors on smaller lights like this. The barn doors weigh almost as much as the lens itself, and with small fixtures, the setup starts to feel a bit unsafe. So if I'm using this on something like a 200X or a 300C, I'd probably stick to only the lens, without barn doors. And I'd strongly recommend sandbagging all your stands, tightening everything properly and not leaving it unattended. It's one of those things where it works perfectly fine, but you have to treat it like a real production tool, not like a small accessory. With smaller lights, it doubles or even triples the weight of the whole unit, so a sturdier light stand might be required. One disadvantage we noticed in studio testing is a haloing effect. It appears as a faint, rainbow-like ring roughly around a 170-degree circle. What's happening here is that basically the barrel of the Fresnel is not long enough, so when the light is hitting the lens at certain angles, some of it spills out at the edges. And the spill creates this faint circular ring around the beam. You don't always notice it, but the moment you bring the light close to a wall or ceiling, especially a white surface, it becomes pretty obvious. The simplest solution is literally a strip of gaff tape around the outer edge of the lens housing, or a quick skirt made from black wrap. Basically, you just extend the barrel by a centimeter or two and block the edge spill. After that, the halo is gone. Next up, a use case on Aputure 400X. This light has much sturdier yoke and handled the weight without any problems. We used it on a TV series episode and it worked perfectly fine in a real production environment. We also used it with the Amaran 660C from the newer Ray line. This fixture has a strong yoke and the lens balances very well on it. One thing to mention, we didn't push it past about 90% output, because the lens is rated for 600 watts and we wanted to avoid overheating. In this case, the outside temperature was around 15-20 degrees Celsius, and after running for about 1 or 2 hours, we removed the lens and checked the temperature. It was barely warm. The last light we had it on was the Aputure 700X. Again, it has a strong yoke, and even with the Barndoors installed, it didn't feel like it was stressing the mount. It worked perfectly fine. We limited output again to avoid overheating and ran it at about 80% max. One thing worth mentioning, newer Aputure fixtures have noticeably better heat management. The body and especially the Bowens mount area tend to stay cooler compared to similar Amaran fixtures. In the end, despite a few shortcomings, like the slight haloing effect and the tight barn door latching system, it's still a very useful piece of kit. It covers a really versatile range of lights. We tested it with 60X, which I don't recommend because the mount is probably too weak, but in a pinch it'll work. Then we tested it with the 100X, 200X, 300C, 400X, 660C and 700X. So it works across a huge range of fixtures and you can use one Fresnel for all of them. It gives you improved shadow quality and much better control compared to the included reflectors. And that's really the main reason to use it. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.